This week's Parsha, PARSHAS ki SOVO, we have the Parsha of the Teichacha. Chazal tell us, we read the Teichacha at the end of the year, before Rosh Hashanah. Tichla Shana v'kil leiseh. We want to knock out all the Teichacha, all the Klolus. Shetaka b'zoicha, Tichla Shana v'kil leiseh. We should all have a ksiva chasima toiva. The Torah says, why is it that the Teichacha comes? Why is there the oynish of the Teichacha? Just a few words. Tachas asher lo avadtas Hashem elekecha b'simcha b'tov levav. Says the Rabbi Shalel, you want to know why all the oynshim, everything comes? Very simple. Tachas asher lo avadtas Hashem elekecha b'simcha b'tov levav. That we weren't oived Hashem b'simcha. We didn't daven, learn b'simcha. And then the pasuk says, "Meiroiv koil." What does it mean, Meiroiv koil? We weren't oived Hashem b'simcha. What's Meiroiv koil? So PARSHAS, we would understand Meiroiv koil means because we had everything good. The Teichacha comes because we weren't oived Hashem b'simcha. Why weren't we oived Hashem b'simcha? Meiroiv koil, because we had everything good. Meiroiv koil, from having so much good, that's why we weren't oived Hashem b'simcha. So the Maral Miprak, whose yahrzeit is today, in his Pirush ala Torah says that can't be. It can't be that the reason why we weren't oived Hashem b'simcha is meiroiv koil because we had everything. He says, Adarabba, when a person has everything, that's actually a reason to help out to, yes, be oived Hashem b'simcha. So that can't be the reason why, saying, why weren't we oived Hashem b'simcha? Because we had everything good. When a person has everything good, Adarabba, that helps a person. Person's more b'menuchas hanefesh. He could daven better, he could learn better. Yeah, if there's good air conditioning, it's easier to learn. Meiroiv koil makes it harder. That's not a goyrem not to be oived Hashem b'simcha. So he explains, of course it makes it easier. But the taina is bigger. Why weren't you oived Hashem b'simcha if you had meiroiv koil? Of course it is because we weren't oived Hashem b'simcha. Okay, we weren't oived Hashem b'simcha. But meiroiv koil, we had everything good, and still we weren't oived Hashem b'simcha. That's the taina. Not that was a goyrem for us not to be oived Hashem. Now, it should have, the time is, why weren't we oived Hashem b'simcha? We had meiroiv koil. My grandfather says this same pshat also, a bit more b'harchava, and he explains, he says like this, there are two types of zmanim by Klal Yisrael. There's a time that Klal Yisrael is b'harchava. People have money, people have more yishuv adas, people can learn, people can daven. There's no gzeiros and laws that a person can't do mitzvahs. And then these times, these harder times, like it calls the times of Hester, whether if it's times living where a person can't do mitzvahs, or times where Klal Yisrael is being killed out. He was a person actually that lived through two of such type of zmanim. During the Holocaust, there was a time of Hester. It was very hard to makayim mitzvahs, trying to hold on to stay alive. And then these times when a person can be makayim mitzvahs b'archava. So he says, his yahrzeit is this Sunday, my grandfather. So he says, Enechanami, maybe it's a bigger deal to be makayim a mitzvah matoich Hester. It's much harder. However, when it's metoich harchava, it's a bigger taina if a person is not makayim the mitzvah. You had everything you needed. You have money to makayim the mitzvahs. No one's not letting you do the mitzvahs. So, like what we said from the Maral, that meroiv koil means that we had everything good and still we weren't makayim the mitzvahs. That's the taina. Of course, the taina is that we weren't makayim the mitzvahs, avodas Hashem b'simcha. But meroiv koil, lamaisa, we have everything good. So why not do it b'simcha? If it's b'toich hester, when it's harder times, it's hard to be makayim the mitzvahs. And if a person's makayim the mitzvah, it's more schar and a chanami. But if then a person doesn't do b'toich simcha, we can understand the person's very overwhelmed. He can barely do the mitzvah. But if a person has archava, meroiv koil, he has everything good. So why wasn't the Oved Hashem b'simcha? So we understand the pirush of the pasuk that the toicha comes for not being Oved Hashem b'simcha, meroiv koil. We should have been Oved Hashem b'simcha because we have everything good. But the shaila is, for that comes the toicha. It's taka taina. It's taka taina. We should have done it b'simcha. But the toichacha, to get all the einshim that we have, the toichacha, it's taka taina. We should have been Oved Hashem b'simcha. It's taka very important. But that there should be toichacha for not being Oved Hashem b'simcha. It's very important. In Psoire the Abba quotes the Arizal that asks the following question. Chazal say, Kol ha'isa mitzvah achas, if a person does only one mitzvah, metiven loy u'marichen loy yamav v'shnaisav. Just for one mitzvah, a person has arichas yamim, a person has hatava, everything good. Frekta Rizal, we don't see that. There's a lot of people that do more than mitzvah achas, and you don't see marichin la yom of a shnoisav, that a person has arichas yomim. Says the Arizal, you want to know why? Because ha'oisa mitzvah, to do a mitzvah means that you do it b'simcha. How he explains, it shouldn't be that a person does the mitzvah as an oil. He has to do it. The Torah says you have to do a mitzvah, so I'm doing it. Says the Arizal, when you do a mitzvah, you're supposed to do it in the way that it's worth elef alfei din rezav. Every mitzvah that you do should be with such excitement that by doing this one mitzvah, I'm getting millions of dollars. If a person does the mitzvah b'chahai kavana, that it's b'simcha atzuma, then yes, then it's marichin la yom of a shnoisav. So definitely to do a mitzvah b'simcha is super important. It's ma'akev in the essence of the mitzvah. The Chaya Adam has a klal that goes through in Kollel mitzvah. Chaya Adam goes through halachas that a person has to know day to day. Yom Tif, he has a klal to know him b'zehiras ha-mitzvahs. In general, to do any mitzvahs, how to do the mitzvah. Says the Chaya Adam in Sif Yud Gimel, ha-simcha ha-gedoyla b'mitzvah. To do a mitzvah b'simcha, and he brings the Arizal from this week's Parsha, Tachas ha-shalo evadta b'simcha b'tov leiv ratzaloymar. That we weren't, when we did the mitzvahs, what does it mean b'simcha? Ba'avoida yoyse, simcha, the definition means when you do a mitzvah, you're not supposed to be happy like what I said before that you made $1 million. You're supposed to be even happier. You weren't happy ba'avoida yoyse mi'ilu if you found you have all the tanugim and all the precious stones and all the money in the world. That's the definition of b'simcha. So definitely it's super important. It's not just a inyan, it's not just a maila, it's ma'akiv gomer in the mitzvah. But still, that the toichecha should come. I hear, like the Arizal explains, we don't get the schar mitzvah marichin la yom of a shnoisav. But we did the mitzvah. Tachas shelo yavadatas Hashem Elokecha b'simcha. We were over Hashem. We just didn't do it b'simcha. So what? So the toichecha should come. So you could say the Rav in Mishnayos in Pirkei Avos says schar mitzvah mitzvah. He says the following. You have to understand how it goes into the Lashon Mishnah. But he says schar mitzvah mitzvah in Pirkei Avos means that every mitzvah really has two mitzvahs. There's one part of the mitzvah is doing the mitzvah of shofar, the mitzvah of lulav. There's another mitzvah of doing a pesimcha. Says like the Rav, Pirush HaMishnayos. There's another mitzvah of doing a pesimcha. Meaning to say, there's a separate discussion of being besimcha, but then he's doing the mitzvah besimcha. We said before that you're supposed to be happy to do the mitzvah, but to do it besimcha. Besimcha. Be happy you're doing the mitzvah, be besimcha. So l'chayr, if you don't do the mitzvah besimcha, if you're not besimcha when you do the mitzvah, so you don't have both mitzvahs. A person's makayim the mitzvah of shofar, l'maisa it's Rosh Hashanah, it's Yom Adin, and he's lacking, doesn't have simcha. The goyin during the mitzvah of Tkiyah shofar, as brought was with moiridik besimcha. He wasn't besimcha, so l'chayr he has the mitzvah of shofar. He doesn't have the second mitzvah of besimcha. So that's why the toichecha should come, unless you say that it's like he was mevatel the second mitzvah. PARSHAS, you don't have that second benefit, another mitzvah of doing it besimcha. I want to share with the Olam two terutzim. This is a famous kasha. I'm sure these many pshatim. In Likutei Torah, the Baal HaTanya explains the following. He says, "Ain't tzaddik PARSHAS shelo yechta." Unfortunately, people are chayta. That's the reality. People do aveirus, and we have Rosh Hashanah and Kippur to do tshuva. However, if a person would do a mitzvah mitoich simcha, mitoich simcha means like what we spoke before. A person's excited when he does the mitzvah. He's into it. He's fired up. It's not just yotzit zayin. A person does it, but simcha means that's his essence. He's excited to do the mitzvah. He wants to do the mitzvah. That will be mashpia on a person not to do aveirus. The Kotzker Rebbe says the same idea. If a person does a mitzvah with a geschmack, that itself, besides the school of the mitzvah, just the reality, if a person's worked up in the mitzvah, then it helps a person refrain from doing aveirus. The toichecha comes, of course, because of a person doing aveirus. When the pasuk says, Tachas shelo yavad Hashem Elokecha b'simcha, the toichecha is not because we didn't do mitzvahs b'simcha. If you don't do a mitzvah b'simcha, you're lacking a very big part of the mitzvah. But that's not a reason to get toichecha. The toichecha comes, the einshim, in this week's Parsha, Rachmana litzlan, is because when a person doesn't do a mitzvah b'simcha, that causes for a person to be chayte. And along these lines, my grandfather also, Malchamas Yehuda, says, not just in Aveira, when a person is down, when a person doesn't have simcha, a person's not a control, when a person is ba'atzvus, they can do a lot of crazy things, unfortunately. And the Mela, the simcha, what the Baal HaTanya says, the simcha shal mitzvah helps from people not being over Aveirus. It helps people having a healthy, good, Torah-digger life. So Mamela, shot number one, the Toichecha comes because a person doesn't do mitzvahs besimcha. Mamela, it's goyrem for bad things, for aveirus, for a person to be ba'atzvus. Another teretz says the Kotzker Rebbe, you weren't Oved Hashem, which means, if you're not Oved Hashem, which means doing Averis. That could be, Kapshuta. You weren't Oved Hashem, you did Averis. But what's this Besimcha? Says the Kotzker Rebbe, and we'll soon see it's in the Seporna clearly, there's one thing if a person does an Avera. A person's chayte, it's geferlich, but a person does an Avera, it's an Avera. But if a person does an Avera besimcha, that's already what's goyrem the teichecha. The first pshat we said is that a person didn't do the mitzvah besimcha, memela he was chayte. The second pshat we're saying is that a person was not oived Hashem, which means he did Averis, but he did it besimcha. The Seporna says the following, by the Cheta Egel, so Moiri de Gezach, he says, the Choymer Adover, by the Cheta Egel, the Seporna says, is not the Cheta Egel, it's that they did it with Mechoilis, they did it with excitement. Vayichar Af Moshe wasn't the Cheta Egel, Noir V'oyim. Klal Yisrael's Oiver Avodah Zarah, and that wasn't what the Vayichar Af Moshe. Vayichar Af Moshe, Moshe Rabbeinu broke the luchas. He says, they were happy. That's why it was Vayichar Af Moshe, and he broke the luchas. And that was also the taina that they made Chag Hashem Machar. Meaning to say is, there's one thing that they were chayte, but to make a yom tov out of it, like he says, shezois hoisa sibas hamachayla she'asal shehoisa ra'a, says the Seporna, was worse than the Cheta Egel itself. So the second pshat, the reason why the teichecha comes, is because doing an Aveira with excitement, that's geferlich. Reb Moshe Feinstein in Chuvas, in Igris, in Yeredeya, brings the following question on the note of the Shviris Aluchas that he was asked. There's a kasha, why did Moshe Rabbeinu break the luchas when he was still in Shamayim, when the Eibishter told him? Why did he wait to calm down? So Reb Moshe brings that somebody wanted to answer because Einay Doime Real Shmiya. When Moshe Rabbeinu came down and he saw the Poyel Klal Yisrael Chayte B'Cheta Egel, that's when he broke it. But just Shmiya not. So that's why Moshe Rabbeinu, even though he heard it from the Rabbeinu Shalom, he only broke it when he came down and saw Klal Yisrael Chayte. That's when he broke it. Zokter Moshe, it's not shaykh to say such a thing. It's not possible to say that when Moshe Rabbeinu heard from the Rabbeinu Shalom directly about the Chayte, that there could be anything bigger, that it's Ein Doime Real Shmiya, that Moshe Rabbeinu, he heard it, but when he saw it, that was more. Dr. Moshe, when Moshe Rabbeinu heard it from the Rabbeinu Shalom, that's the max. It's klar, it's Ke'ilu like he saw it. But Dr. Moshe, what was the reason that Moshe Rabbeinu only broke the luchas when he came down? The same Yisoid. The Eibishter only told Moshe Rabbeinu that you should know Klal Yisrael is chayte with the Cheta Egel. The Rabbeinu Shalom did not tell Moshe Rabbeinu that they did it besimcha. And the Mela, that they were chayta, That's not a reason to break the luchas. But when Moshe Rabbeinu came down and he saw Klal Yisrael was chayta, but it was besimcha, that's why Moshe Rabbeinu broke the luchas. There's one thing doing an Aveira, but to do an Aveira besimcha with excitement, that's already a big taina, and that's why the teichecha comes. So we said two pshatim to explain on the not positive note why the teichecha comes. Either because when a person doesn't do a mitzvah besimcha, a person he can't refrain from doing aveiros or doing aveiros besimcha. But just to briefly focus on the positive, on yes doing mitzvahs b'simcha. I want to begin with the Chafetz Chaim, whose yahrzeit is this coming Wednesday, Chaf Daled Elul. He quotes in Hilchas Simchas Torah, he quotes the Arizal. He's speaking about the Maila Tzuba of dancing, Kavod HaTorah, different Maramakamis and the Goyin. But he brings the Arizal in general on doing a mitzvah b'simcha. He says, Hi'idu al Arizal sha'amad. The Arizal said, Shahamayla ha'elyoina shehisik. This that Arizal was masig in Yani Kabbalah, very high madregas, was al yidei shahayim sameach b'simcha shal mitzvah. We spoke till now how the problems that it causes shaloi b'simcha, but the maila of being makayim a mitzvah b'simcha. Just to bring a few examples in particular mitzvahs, this is in general a mitzvahs. We mentioned this Tuesday in the Shmuz, but the Leket Yoshe brings from his Rabbi about the Trumas Adeshen, that why do we start Slichas on a Matzah Shabbos? This Matzah Shabbos, Haboleinu L'Taiva, we're starting Slichas. Really, you need 4 days of Slichas, just like a carbon, to check yourself. So we start Matzah Shabbos, and this year is the longest Slichas possible. It only happens in the year of Erev Pesach Shechalias B'Shabbos, because if we're going to start next week, it's only 2 days. So we start a whole week before. We're going to say a week and 2 days Slichas. It's the longest possible. Rosh Hashanah can't fall out on a Wednesday. Lo Yadu Rosh. So if it's not like this year on a Tuesday, then it's Thursday. Once Rosh Hashanah is on a Thursday, that's the minimum amount of days of Slichas. But this year, it's the maximum. No, last year I think, I don't remember what, but Rosh Hashanah could be, we could still have longer Slichas if Rosh Hashanah is on a Monday. Rosh Hashanah could be on a Monday, so then it's a week and a day. This year it's a week and 2 days, the longest Slichas possible. Why do we have Slichas so long? Because we start on a Matzah Shabbos. Why do we start on Matzah Shabbos? If we need 4 days, so this year would be Thursday. Next week Thursday, Friday, Sunday and Monday. A whole week and 2 days. Says the Leket Yosher, you know why? Because when we start Slichas, we want to start Slichas b'simcha. How do we have simcha? When we start Matzah Shabbos. We're coming off Shabbos. Shabbos, a person has time to learn. He has simcha of learning. He has Oynik Shabbos. But mainly we want to be Makayim Slichas b'simcha. Doing Tshuva b'simcha. That's why we start Slichas Matzah Shabbos. On the note of Inui, the mitzvah Midairaisa of Inui, we're learning now in the Kollel Boiker, the 8th parak of Yuma. We spoke in the previous Shurim. We focus mamash on the mitzvah Torah of Inui. It's a mitzvah sasei Dairaisa to be be'inui b'Yom Kippur. Be'inui, like the Gemara explains, not to eat, not to drink. The Chamish Inuyim. Says this Yesoid v'Shorish Avodah. Some people may know it. Some of the Machzorim do us the tayv and they put it in. By Mincha, says the Yesoid v'Shorish Avodah. Mincha's already Yom Kippur in the afternoon. You're already fasting for a good 14 hours, 16 hours. You're starting to get hungry, or let's just say you're almost starving already. Instead of a person losing out on the mitzvah and like thinking already, when is already Matzah Yom Kippur, how much time do I have? A person could utilize, focus on the mitzvah, to do the mitzvah b'simcha. V'ha'ikar. For me personally, sometimes it's a chizuk. A person gets hungry, mincha time in the afternoon. Yes, he's talking in pain, he's starving. You should think, I want to be mekayim the mitzvah. And he brings who sameach v'tayv levav al goydel hanachas she'oised denachas ruach. In other words, person should focus to do the mitzvahs inui b'simcha. The Archas Tzadikim has a shar hasimcha. So we didn't speak about it b'chlal today, that a person's always supposed to be b'simcha. Always supposed to be b'simcha. Clearly. Today we're speaking about when doing mitzvahs, Oived Hashem. I mean, the truth is a person's always being Oived Hashem, but mitzvah doing the mitzvahs, besimcha. In Orchos Tzadikim he says, when Shabbos comes, when Yom Tov comes, Yom Tov, there's a mitzvah to be besimcha. We're not speaking about that, also not. A person's supposed to be besimcha, there's a mitzvah to be besimcha. But says the Orchos Tzadikim, Shabbos. Yeah, Shabbos is coming with Thursday, Shabbos. A person should focus on Shabbos, not in getting enjoyment of what he eats, but to focus on the Simcha Shel Mitzvah. Of course, there's a mitzvah of Einig, but to focus on Shabbos, Shabbos is Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, to focus on the mitzvah, to do it besimcha. Elo Yosem HaSimcha of Shabbos, not in the food, Al Avos Hashem Yizbarach, and to connect to Rabbi Shalom. That's where the Simcha should be. Sometimes it's hard to do a mitzvah b'simcha. We saw by Inui. When else? Tzedakah. When a person gives tzedakah, sometimes it's hard. You could do the mitzvah, you give money, but sometimes it's hard for people to part from the money. Says the chinuch. Lasois tzedakah imatzarach aleh b'simcha u'b'tov levav. Every mitzvah is supposed to do b'simcha. It doesn't say by every mitzvah b'simcha. Here it's harder to mekayim the mitzvah b'simcha. Sometimes a person, it's not so geschmack to do it b'simcha. I just want to conclude. The Shevet HaLevi, Reb Vosner, when he gave a hesped on Rabbi Yashiv, he spoke about the earlier years when they were in Kollel together in Yerushalayim. And he said, one of the biggest milas of Rabbi Yashiv, he said two ikar points. One he said was that Rabbi Yashiv learned Basma, the Rabbi. He said his limud was always besimcha atzuma. The other thing was, he says he used to stand by learning, but he said he used to learn besimcha atzuma. And he teaches in Tehillim, David HaMelech says, B'chukaisecha eshtasha. Learning the Torah eshtasha means to geschmack of it, to enjoy, not just to learn Torah, but to get involved. That it's to get into the Torah. Then lo eshkach tevarecha. Lo eshkach tevarecha means that a person is not going to forget the Torah. But you know when is it that a person doesn't forget the Torah? A person doesn't forget the Torah, as we said earlier, a person's not chayta. A person practically doesn't forget the Torah when it's b'chukay secha eshtasha. It's not just he learns the Torah. If another person learns the Torah, when a person learns the Torah with a geschmack, with simcha, with excitement, it penetrates, it goes into a person, and a person doesn't forget the Torah. A person's mekayim the mitzvahs. A person's not chayta. We should be zoicha to be oived as Hashem b'simcha. Have a wonderful day. Okay.